A very interesting battle on the top board of the World Rapid Team Championships between GMHans.com and Ashdod Chess Club. We have Hans Niemann taking on Nihal Sarin. They shake hands and off we go. Hans with the white pieces. What is he going to play? E4 is on the board. And Nihal has to decide how to counter it. Nihal is known for his amazing positional play. Every time I look at his game, I want to learn something about positional play from him. Knight comes out to f3, attacking the pawn. Knight c6. Are we going to see the Ruy Lopez? No. Niemann says it's time for the Italian this time. Bishop c5, pawn to d3. Knight comes out. Both of them developing pretty quickly. Nihal pauses for a bit and goes d6. Pawn to c3. They're playing quickly, but at the same time in a very relaxed manner, because this is all opening theory. Bishop goes back to a7. And Hans now taking some time here on this position and plays his pawn to h3. Nihal hasn't castled yet, and I think he might be a bit afraid of the bishop g5 ideas, but now he has castled. Will Hans go for bishop g5, which could make the play a little bit more sharp? But no, he decides to go bishop b3. h6. In the Italian, there are some ideas, which are played. Like, for example, let's say if you are black here, one of the ideas is rook e8, bishop e6. Another one is knight e7, knight g6. And all of these ideas keep sort of revolving in one game to another. And it's interesting to see how the players time these ideas. Like you can see here, rook e8, bishop e6 is the idea that Nihal has played. And generally white avoids the trade with bishop c2. He goes bishop a4. So a slightly different way of playing the position. And Nihal comes back, breaks the pin. And now knight g3 to continue in the normal strategy seems like the best idea. And so we are closing in on the opening phase here. Knight e7, a bishop trade is offered once again. Hans can avoid it by going back bishop c2, and he does it. He avoids it, and Nihal brings his knight to g6, and the pawn moves forward to d4. So white has more space, and I would also say a small edge out of the opening. Nihal plays his queenside pawn to b5 and says that in the center I'm pretty solid. Hans plays his bishop to e3. Generally, when you put your bishop here, the e4 pawn is put under some pressure. Nihal takes even more space with the move c5. And Hans decides to trade in the center. Pawn takes back. Now the d5 square is a little weak, but no knight can reach there pretty quickly. So the pawn moves to a4. c4 played, very important move, because if you had played b4, the c4 square would have been weakened. So c4, and now he takes, rook takes, and plays his knight to f5. Hans is playing on both the sides of the board. Now the knight can come in here. Also, trading this might not be the best idea. So queen b6 is played. And the queen moves into d6. If you take the queen, I'm going to take with the knight and then take this pawn on b5. So have to be careful. You can't trade the queens. And Nihal plays rook e6. But Hans goes back. Well, he could have just traded on b6 and this position is playable. It's a completely fine position. But instead he goes back, and now Nihal takes on a4. He's attacking the pawn on b2. Takes back the pawn on a4. And I guess you trade the bishops. Like, for the time being, it seems like white should be slightly better because c4 is weak, the knight is well placed on f5, but also b2 is weak, and Nihal plays queen b5 attacking the rook, queen c2 played, and now brings his knight to f4. A very, very interesting position with 4 knights against each other, and now knight d2 played, putting pressure on the c4 pawn. And here Nihal goes knight h5, and he's like, if you want to take the pawn, be my guest. I'm swinging my rook over and trying to attack you. Hans plays his king to h2. And now Nihal moves his knight to d3. b2 is hanging, f2 is slightly weak. He goes rook b1. Well, if you were to take knight takes f2, there is knight takes c4 here. So Nihal goes rook d7 first. Knight comes back to e3. Such a maneuvering game of both the knights. c4 is now really under pressure. Nihal says, let me just trade it off for the pawn on f2 and ndc4. And now he takes on e4. If you take queen takes, the rook is hanging. So knight a3 was played. Maybe better was rook takes a5, and white is clearly better here. But Hans wants more. Queen d3, and he takes rook takes e4. Now the knight comes back to f6. A very interesting move, because now the rook has to move and the e3 knight will fall. So this is some insane calculations by Nihal, because the rook has to move, e3 will fall, and that has happened. But Hans is able to win the a5 pawn, which makes the game very exciting and interesting, because the queen side pawns are very strong for white. He has 2 passers there. So Nihal first brings his rook to e2. And now the knight comes to c4. Defending b2, also preparing b4, b5, b6, b7, b8. Knight h5. Nihal wants to attack on the king side. Who's going to succeed here? Nihal's attack or Hans's just simple play? Rook g6 played, rook g1. Hans is like, my knight and rook and 2 pawns are enough for for winning this position. Wow, what an exciting battle here. Nihal has 4 minutes, Hans has 5 minutes. f6 played to just safeguard the pawn structure. Rook d5 played. You could also, I was wondering if you could push the pawn, but perhaps knight f4 becomes a strong move. So rook d5. He goes rook c2, attacking the pawn on c3. And now pawn to b5. Maybe you can defend here, but then knight f4. Again, that's a problem. So he pushes his pawn forward. Will Nihal take here? Is the question. I guess he can. He's calculating here. Rook c3. He's thinking b6, rook c4, check, king f7, b7, and then you give up an exchange, and this should be a draw. Black has a knight and 2 pawns, but instead here Hans goes knight a5. He wants to win. That's the thing about Hans Niemann. He always plays ambitiously. He wants to win. Knight f4 played, and now very important to go rook d2. But he goes rook d8, check, king h7, b6, but he's missed something very important. Rook g3, threatening rook h3, gh3, rook h3, checkmate. And if the rook moves away, rook takes g2, king h1, and rook h3 is mate. Unbelievable turn of events there. Nihal knows that he has trapped his opponent. You can see that look on his face. And Hans Niemann can't believe that he's just simply missed this checkmate. What a pretty finish there. Hans Niemann wanted to make a queen, but Nihal was too smart. He brought his rook in, and there sort of a friendly gesture by his team captain there, and Hans Niemann loses. Nihal manages to win there. That's the thing about the master trickster Nihal. It's he always manages to trap his opponent, so you have to be careful all the time.